He raised his hand first, gave the right answer, solved what no one else could. But the teacher called him cheater instead of genius and erased his grade in front of the class. Now the cameras are on, the school's spinning lies, and one quiet hallway recording holds the truth. The question is, who will believe a black kid over a tenured white teacher? And when that video drops, whose life will it destroy first? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Watch till the end. Then rate this story out of 10. Share in the comments below. Your feedback helps us bring you even better stories every single day. The first time Jamal Kendrick stepped into the Advanced Thermal Systems lab, it wasn't the hum of high-tech engines or the sterile scent of fresh coolant that greeted him. It was the silence. The kind of silence that wasn't quiet, it was judgmental, cold, watching, measuring. 16 students, all white, sat in 2 neat rows of reinforced steel benches, designer laptops open, mechanical blueprints projected across multiple digital surfaces. Some wore school-branded fleeces from rowing teams or debate championships. Others casually sported watches that cost more than Jamal's entire semester stipend. No one made room when he walked in. No one even nodded. They weren't just students, they were legacies. Sons and daughters of senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, engineering firm founders. This wasn't just a class. It was a gate. And Jamal Kendrick, 19, from the south side of Chicago, wasn't holding the right key. He paused near the doorway, one hand gripping the strap of his backpack, the other resting against the metal casing of a dormant combustion engine display. He didn't need to look around to feel the judgment pulsing off every set of eyes in the room. He'd felt it before in high school when teachers assumed he plagiarized his calculus final, at science fairs where white parents asked which magnet school he was bussed in from, and now again here, at Alderton University, one of the country's most elite engineering programs. Jamal took a breath. Not deep, he'd learned to hide anxiety in shallow inhales. He stepped forward and slid into the last empty seat at the far right bench. The whispers started within seconds. He's in the wrong section. Must be lost. Is he here for the maintenance internship? He didn't react. He never did. Instead, Jamal pulled out a simple leather-bound notebook, no logos, no flair, and placed it flat on the desk. He didn't open it. Professor Langston entered with the arrogance of a man used to controlling every eye in the room. Late 50 seconds, sharp gray suit, gold wedding band that gleamed under the LED lights. He moved with a deliberate stiffness, not old age, but entitlement. Behind him, a grad assistant wheeled in a sealed engine block mounted on a demo rig. "Morning," Langston barked. "This is advanced lab, meaning if you're not already fluent in engine dynamics and component thermals, you're wasting oxygen." His eyes skimmed the room, then paused on Jamal. "New face," he said. "You. Name?" "Jamal Kendrick." Langston didn't nod. He turned to the board and began scribbling. Jamal didn't flinch. He had studied Langston's papers before ever enrolling, knew that behind all the awards was a pattern. Only one black student had ever finished Langston's lab with a recommendation. And even that came with a clause. Asterisks always followed excellence when it came in black skin. The students began the first exercise, analyzing a simulated coolant malfunction in a theoretical rotary engine. As complex graphs filled the displays, fingers flew across keyboards. But Jamal didn't move. He hadn't even opened his notebook. He just watched, listened, measured the sounds of strain from the model on screen, traced the pattern of heat, pulses flickering on the side monitor. He didn't need notes. His mind worked like blueprints drawn in breath, precise, fleeting, but unforgettable. Across the bench, a student named Connor Blonde, Patagonia vest, smugness sharpened by wealth, leaned sideways and stage whispered to the girl beside him, "Think he even knows what a cooling manifold is?" She laughed. Loudly. Jamal didn't react. But inside, something flared. Not anger, not even humiliation. Just memory. Of how his father used to rebuild used lawnmowers after night shifts. How Jamal, barely 9, learned to read torque ratios off greasy manuals under a single bulb. How engines never lied to him, only people did. Halfway through the session, Langston wheeled over a prototype engine locked inside a reinforced glass case. The room leaned in, intrigued. "This," he said, tapping the case, "is our anomaly. A next-gen turbine that runs cold but leaks power. 6 months of grad-level diagnostics have yielded nothing. Anyone who solves it," he paused, letting the promise hang, "gets my personal letter to the Department of Defense internship shortlist." Every head turned toward the engine. Except Jamal's. His gaze had already been locked on it the moment it entered. Langston continued. Any volunteers to take a crack at it? 10 minutes on the clock. Public. No help. No one moved, not at first. Then, with slow confidence, Jamal stood. Laughter broke out. Connor slapped the table. Oh man. For real? This is gonna be good. Langston didn't smile. You think you're ready? I know engines, Jamal said, evenly. Langston's eyebrow arched. 10 minutes. Timer starts when you touch the casing. Jamal stepped forward. Every eye locked on him now, but not in awe. In anticipation of failure, the kind that would confirm every bias they clung to. He didn't touch his notebook. Didn't need to. As he stood in front of the sealed engine, he did something that made several students frown. He closed his eyes. Jamal wasn't thinking like a student. He was remembering like a mechanic. The hum, the pitch, the coil tremble. He wasn't analyzing the system, he was feeling its language. Connor leaned back, whispering to the others. Bet he thinks it's spiritual. But Jamal's hands moved to the side vents, then to the compression lock, then paused. Something was wrong. Not with the engine, with the design. He crouched, examined the underframe, tapped the side, then suddenly looked back at the display monitors, narrowed his eyes and his jaw clenched. There was something there, something they hadn't seen. Langston checked his watch. 7 minutes left. Jamal stood, turned to the side panel no one had touched before. He reached slowly. Behind him, the class smirked. But Jamal wasn't reaching for a solution. He was reaching for confirmation, because what he saw wasn't just an error, it was a decision, a deliberate design choice that made failure inevitable, unless you understood something deeper. He touched the edge, exhaled sharply, and said, just loud enough. This engine was never meant to work. Gasps rippled. Langston froze. What did you say? The professor asked sharply. Jamal turned. It's not broken. It's built to leak power when run under standard calibration, but only if you assume the airflow model they teach in the default coursework. He glanced around. Anyone who came from a shop background, who's worked on old equipment patched with non-OEM parts, you'd spot this in seconds. Silence, because no one else had. Jamal turned back and began working. And that's when it happened. In minute 8, the power indicator blinked, not red, not yellow, green. For the first time since the prototype was built, the engine purred, softly, cleanly. No overheat, no leak. The room was dead quiet. Professor Langston's lips parted slightly. Connor dropped his pen, but Jamal didn't smile. He just stepped back, hands calm, eyes locked not on the engine, but the stunned faces around him. No one had laughed this time. And yet, none of them knew why Jamal never once touched his notebook, not even to sketch. Because what he saw wasn't just heat maps and schematics. What Jamal saw was something none of them ever could. But none of them knew the reason Jamal never touched his notebook, because what he saw was something none of them ever could. Jamal didn't expect applause. But he didn't expect silence to feel like a punishment either. After the engine roared to life, Langston simply muttered, "Class dismissed," without looking at him. No nod, no good job, no eye contact. It was as if the moment hadn't happened, as if the truth vibrating through the engine's perfect hum didn't deserve acknowledgement, as if Jamal Kendrick hadn't just solved something half the grad school couldn't. The students packed their bags in tense silence. Some side-eyed Jamal, others avoided looking at him at all. Only one, Riley, the assistant who wheeled in the engine earlier, gave him a glance that lasted longer than 2 seconds. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Jamal sat still. Let them leave first. It was something he learned in freshman year. In rooms where he didn't belong, movement made noise, and noise made enemies. As he finally stood and slung his backpack over his shoulder, Langston's voice sliced through the air. "Mr. Kendrick," he said, without turning from his monitor. Jamal stopped. Langston typed for a few seconds, then paused. "Just so you're aware, the Department of Defense internship shortlists don't consider gut instinct a qualifying method." "I didn't use instinct," Jamal replied. "I recognized a deliberate bypassing of passive thermal flow. The leak was built into the offset intake." Langston cut him off. "I've reviewed that engine for 6 months. So have multiple postdocs. I doubt a freshman could see what an entire panel missed. Maybe they weren't looking at it the same way." Langston finally turned. His gaze was steel. "And how were you looking at it, exactly?" Jamal didn't answer. He just stared back, calm, but not submissive. Langston's lips twitched. Don't get too comfortable, Kendrick. One stunt doesn't mean you're ready for this program. I'm not here to get comfortable. Langston gave a tight smile. Good. Because you're not going to be. The next week unfolded slowly, but the tone had changed. Subtle things. The engine assignments on the shared drive would mysteriously vanish before Jamal could download them. Tools he signed out from the supply cabinet would somehow never be logged. One day, his access card failed entirely. Riley had to let him in. No one ever directly said anything racist. That would have made it too easy to report. Instead, it came in fragments. Oh, didn't know they taught thermals in public school. Hey Jamal, what's it like being the only one here who didn't visit MIT as a kid? Bet you're a wizard with car engines though. Right? The way they said you made it clear. You don't belong here. You're the exception. You're tolerated until you make someone uncomfortable. Jamal kept quiet. Not because he didn't have the words, but because he didn't want to give them the show. Every reaction was a win for them. Every visible bruise to his confidence was confirmation of what they wanted to believe. Still, the damage sank in. He'd go back to his dorm and stare at the wall, not moving for hours. He stopped checking messages from his mom. She sent prayer hands and proud emojis. He couldn't respond. He didn't want to lie. Because the truth was, Jamal felt like he was breaking apart slowly. Not from workload. Not from failure. From erasure. And that was worse. One afternoon, the entire lab was called for a special session. Langston stood at the front, flanked by two visiting researchers. On the table beside him sat a locked black case, the kind used for housing confidential prototypes. The energy in the room shifted. Langston's voice was clipped. Today, we begin exploratory diagnostics on an anomaly we've been unable to crack. A next phase zero-loss combustion prototype. None of our calibration models work. It either overheats or underperforms. Your job over the next 3 weeks is to test, break, and document. He opened the case. A sleek, alien-looking engine core gleamed inside. Fluid lines, compact design, no manual included. This wasn't a student model. This was government-level tech. Langston raised his hand. To be clear, this unit is unsolvable by current methods. We've submitted it to 3 institutions. No one's cracked it. Connor smirked from the first row. So you're saying it's impossible? Langston nodded. Essentially. But it's your job to try anyway. The room buzzed with excitement. Jamal sat up, because while the others saw a challenge, he saw invitation. The moment Langston said, unsolvable, Jamal's eyes shifted. Not wide. Not shocked. Focused. Something in him turned on like a light. He leaned forward, gaze locked on the engine, as if he already knew it wasn't what they thought it was. Riley noticed first. Her glance lingered on him. Then, slowly, others did too. And for the first time since that first day, the room looked at Jamal, not with mockery, but with uncertainty. Langston scanned the faces, then his eyes settled on Jamal just for a second. And in that second, Jamal smiled. Not out of arrogance, but because he could already feel it. There was something wrong with that engine, and he knew where to look. But when Professor Langston dropped the words unsolvable engine anomaly, Jamal's eyes lit up, and everyone noticed. They called it the Ghost, a compact, next-gen combustion prototype that looked more like a sculpted piece of art than a machine. Curved titanium panels, black thermal coatings that absorbed light, and a core so tightly wound that even digital schematics struggled to make sense of it. The university had showcased it at 2 international conferences, not for function, but for mystique. Because no one, not even its own creators, could make it run properly. It was a paradox engine. Engineered for maximum efficiency, minimum heat, and zero noise, but it bled power every time it was tested. Sometimes it wouldn't start. Other times it would roar to life, only to collapse under its own load within seconds. The seniors had tried. Grad students had tried. Langston himself had taken it to the Pentagon-sponsored tech fair, daring world-class engineers to decode it. No one could. And that's exactly why it was perfect for what Langston had in mind now. That afternoon, Langston stood at the front of the room, his tone measured but heavy with condescension. This engine, he said, gesturing to the sleek unit perched on the demo rig, has defeated every predictive model and mechanical intervention we've thrown at it. Consider it your Everest. You can study it, test it, simulate it. But until now, no one has even come close to diagnosing the core issue. He let the silence stretch. Then, with a smirk he didn't bother hiding, he added, Unless someone thinks they can crack it. Right now. 10 minutes. Live. Laughter bubbled from the front row. Not loud, but sharp. Connor spun in his seat. Yo, Kendrick. You up for another magic trick? A few chuckles followed. Jamal, sitting near the back, didn't flinch. His eyes were on the engine. Not the insult. Not the audience. The room waited. Langston crossed his arms. No takers? Riley shot a glance toward Jamal, part curiosity, part warning. Jamal stood. The room stiffened. Langston's eyebrow twitched. Upward. As if amused. Really? I'll try, Jamal said calmly. Langston stepped aside, gesturing toward the engine like a magician daring someone to reveal the secret to the trick. 10 minutes, he said, tapping his watch. No tools. No notebook. Just you and the engine. Let's see what you've got. Connor leaned back. This is gonna be so good. Jamal approached slowly. He didn't touch the machine. Not yet. He just circled it, observing, breathing with it. To the rest of the class, it looked like hesitation. But to Jamal, it was translation. Because this engine wasn't just failing, it was lying. It pretended to follow standard logic. But the error wasn't technical. It was philosophical. It was in the assumptions made by its design. He looked up at the top schematic projected on the screen. The layout showed perfect symmetry. Over-designed. Even. Then his eyes narrowed. Why would an engine built for minimum friction have vent placements that doubled back on their own heat path? Jamal crouched low. He tilted his head, studying the compression line beneath the thermal housing. Then he noticed something barely visible. A micro indent on the outer casing, milled just slightly off-center. It was an override, hidden under the outer polish. Meant to be overlooked. He rose and looked straight at Langston. This engine wasn't meant to be solved by following the manual, he said. Langston blinked. Pardon? Jamal moved to the back panel, and without hesitation, opened a compartment that had been untouched in every previous attempt. Gasps echoed. Inside, instead of a coolant reserve, was a misaligned sensor array with heat redirect wiring rerouted through what looked like a vent, but was in fact a choke point. This isn't just a prototype, Jamal continued. It's a trap. Explain, Langston said, now sounding less amused. If you follow the official model, Jamal said, you force the engine into a loop, where performance drops every time heat builds beyond a certain point. But if you reroute through this, he pointed to the choke, you free the intake. The system stops overheating, but only if you ignore the default schematic. Langston's jaw tightened. Connor muttered, that's not possible. Jamal stepped back. Start it, he said. Langston hesitated. Then, with a glance at the other professors watching behind the glass, he keyed in the start sequence. The engine stuttered once. Twice. Then, a soft, cold hum. The readouts lit up. Balanced. Green. Not spiking. No drain. Riley gasped. 2 other students stood up from their seats, stunned. The engine was working. Not sputtering. Not burning. Running. Flawlessly. Langston's face darkened, but he said nothing. He just watched the numbers. Jamal didn't smile, because he saw what no one else had, yet the signature inside the code. Embedded in the diagnostics, the error had been intentional. Built not just to be unsolvable, but to disqualify certain ways of thinking. Jamal recognized the signature format from a database he'd studied while researching for his early transfer application. A set of diagnostic assumptions based on elite predictive models, designed by a closed group of engineers, all from one legacy research lineage. This wasn't just academic bias. It was engineering written in the language of exclusion. Jamal's throat tightened. He stepped back, heart pounding not from pride but realization. He had exposed the engine, but he had also just interrupted something much bigger. Langston leaned in toward the engine, feigning focus, but Jamal saw it. Panic. Behind his eyes. The professor was already recalculating how to spin this. Behind the glass, one of the senior faculty scribbled something on a notepad. Jamal couldn't see what, but he knew it wasn't congratulations. Langston turned. Well, he said, tight-lipped. Seems you got lucky. Jamal didn't reply. Because this wasn't luck. It was the start of something deeper. Something dangerous. And as the class slowly filed out, Connor bumping Jamal's shoulder with an accidental nudge, Riley stayed behind. Her voice was low, serious. You saw it too, didn't you? She said. Jamal nodded. They don't want it fixed, he whispered. They want it to fail. She looked toward Langston, still standing with the other faculty. What are you going to do now? Jamal glanced back at the engine. I'm going to find out why they built a perfect failure. As the countdown began, no one realized Jamal wasn't just solving an engine, he was decoding a lie hidden inside it. The engine's hum faded, replaced by stunned silence. But Jamal didn't hear the silence. He heard the pattern, the way the turbine stabilized too quickly, the way the vent pulse seemed too efficient. His mind, trained not just on physics but on how things lied through their design, caught something others wouldn't think to question. For anyone else in the room, the victory would have been enough. A rare freshman solving what faculty couldn't. Career-defining. But Jamal's eyes weren't on the graphs, or the stunned expressions behind the observation glass. He was watching the readout patterns scroll in real time, and something was wrong. The diagnostics were too clean. It wasn't that the system had begun working when he bypassed the standard flow. It was that it had been waiting for someone to do just that. 7 minutes in, Jamal stopped looking for answers. He started looking for intent. The design flaw had been carefully placed and not just to frustrate engineers. The bypass system wasn't mentioned in the official documentation. It didn't even follow traditional engineering logic. The override wasn't mechanical, it was philosophical. It punished you for thinking conventionally, and rewarded you only if you broke from the FINER's institutional framework, a framework taught in every textbook used in elite programs, frameworks protected and published by a narrow set of engineering authors. Authors all linked, Jamal realized, to Alderton's Legacy Research Board. Jamal's chest tightened, not with fear, with clarity. The failure wasn't technical. It was designed to reveal who had the right kind of mind. And by right, they didn't mean smart. They meant trained in legacy intuition. Jamal had seen it before in grant rejections that cited unorthodox logic paths, in internship screenings that penalized unverified problem-solving methodology. He had seen black inventors ignored, dismissed for using tools they'd built from scratch because they didn't match the aesthetics of white-dominated engineering spaces. This engine wasn't broken. It was a test, and it was rigged. At minute 7, Jamal stepped back from the engine and scanned the setup again. He knew there had to be more, a layer deeper. That's when he noticed the maintenance panel at the base brushed metal, sealed tight with 2 recessed screws. It looked unimportant, almost decorative. No one had ever opened it, not even during previous diagnostics. Jamal crouched low. His fingertips brushed the edge. Behind him, Riley's voice cut the air quietly. "Don't," she said. "That's not part of the test." Jamal didn't answer. He pressed one screw. Nothing. The second. Click. The panel released with a soft hiss. Underneath was something he hadn't expected. Not engine parts, not wiring, a biometric scanner, with a heat-encoded trigger. Jamal froze. What kind of educational prototype required biometric input? Riley stood up. Jamal, seriously. Stop. Langston's voice, behind the glass, now barked through the overhead speaker. Kendrick, step away from the unit. That component is not authorized. But Jamal had already placed his hand near the sensor. A soft red light blinked. Then, turned green. A click. The entire left side of the engine unfolded, not like a machine, but like a vault. Inside were dozens of sealed chipsets. Stamped. Labeled. Confidential. Project Omega. Legacy track only. The words hit Jamal like a slap. Riley gasped. Langston's voice turned sharp. Security override initiated. Jamal Kendrick. You are to immediately step away and put your hands bweep, bweep, bweep. A high-pitched alarm screamed through the lab. Red lights blinked across the ceiling. Steel doors locked with a loud, echoing clank. The class jumped to their feet. Connor stumbled backward. What the hell did he touch? Jamal didn't move. He was still crouched, still staring, because beneath the chipsets, taped to the inner panel, was a list, a printed list. Names, dozens of them, with student IDs, and a column labeled, Status Ineligible for Advancement. He scanned the rows. Each name had a reason. Deviation from standard logic. Unverified intuition method. Non-traditional problem-solving framework. Then he saw the last column. Race, African American, Haitian, Caribbean American. One after another. All marked removed from track. Jamal's stomach twisted. He wasn't just being tested. He was never supposed to be here. This engine was a filter. And the names were its casualties. He felt the room behind him shifting, people shouting, Langston yelling through the intercom, the door shaking as security tried to override the lockdown. But none of that mattered now. Because Jamal Kendrick had found something no one was meant to see, and now the whole room knew he had seen it. With 3 minutes left, Jamal reached into the one place no one dared touch, triggering an alarm that froze the room. The alarm kept wailing, but no one moved. Not at first. The light pouring from the engine core had changed. It wasn't the pale green glow of diagnostics or the warning flashes of power spikes. It was something else. Steady, deep, and pure. A glow that shouldn't have been possible at this stage of testing. A glow that told the truth. Jamal stood in front of it, one hand still resting near the now exposed chipset vault. The biometric panel had sealed shut again, but the damage was done. The engine wasn't just running now, it was thriving. The lab's air shifted. Even Langston, behind the reinforced glass wall of the observation room, stopped speaking. His mouth opened, then closed again. The faculty members beside him exchanged tense glances. They hadn't planned for this. Because Jamal had done more than trigger the core. He had activated it. The engine spun quietly at first, a soft rotation that carried no vibration, no harshness. Then it pulsed. Once. Then again. The kind of pulse you'd expect from a living thing, not a machine. Lights across the dashboard switched from red to gold. Internal diagnostics self-corrected without command. Readings stabilized. Noise dropped to 0. Jamal didn't need a manual to understand what was happening. The engine had entered Phase 2, a power mode none of the previous teams had ever reached. Because they had never found the key. But he had. Not by replicating their process, but by disobeying it. He hadn't seen an engine. He'd seen a message. A machine that whispered to anyone who had the mind to listen differently to those raised outside the orthodoxy of legacy labs and inherited theories. Jamal had understood it, because he had been forced to understand machines as a language of necessity, not a pursuit of status. To him, this wasn't an engineering breakthrough. It was a confession. One the university had kept buried beneath polished chrome and sealed panels. Behind him, the other students were frozen in disbelief. Connor's jaw was slack. Riley's eyes stayed locked on the spinning engine, as if watching something sacred take breath. The silence broke when the roar began. It started soft, a deep-chested hum, then a vibration that lifted through the floor and into the bones of everyone in the lab. The engine vibrated, but didn't rattle. It surged, but didn't heat. It came to life in a way so fluid, so perfect. It made every student instinctively look at the digital readouts to confirm it was real. Everything was green. Efficiency. 99.7% heat loss. Near 0. Output. Climbing. But still silent. Still beautiful. Then, the overhead screen blinked. A message flashed across the top. Legacy mode. Override authentication accepted. Riley's hand flew to her mouth. Legacy mode. It wasn't a feature. It was a tier, a locked phase in military-grade engines, designed to respond only to certain operator profiles. Profiles selected through biometric authority embedded into university databases. Which meant, Jamal never should have had access. And yet, somehow he did. Connor broke the silence. What the hell is going on? Langston burst into the room, keycard bypassing the internal lockdown. The door slammed behind him. He didn't speak as he marched straight toward the engine rig, stepping past students who shrank away from his fury. Jamal stood still. Langston grabbed a nearby wrench from the workbench and walked straight toward Jamal. The air crackled with tension. "Step away," he said through clenched teeth. Jamal hesitated. The engine's not just running. It's learning. It's adapting. Langston didn't respond. He held out his hand. "The wrench," he said coldly. Jamal looked down. He hadn't even realized it was still in his grip, a small torque wrench used to adjust the interior panel. He handed it over slowly. Langston snatched it, but didn't walk away. He leaned in, eyes locked with Jamal's, and whispered just loud enough for only him to hear. "You weren't supposed to pass this test." Jamal didn't blink. Langston stepped back and turned to the class. Suddenly, all professionalism. Clear the lab. Emergency protocol. This system has entered an unauthorized phase. This demonstration is over. But it's working, Riley said, finally speaking. Better than it ever has. Langston ignored her. Connor spoke next. "Isn't this good? I mean, we've never even seen it hit full cycle." Langston spun. Clear. The lab. One by one, they left. Riley hesitated, then turned toward Jamal. Her voice was low. "They're going to erase this, aren't they?" Jamal looked at her, face unreadable. "They're going to try." She paused, then nodded once and followed the others out. Langston waited until the door sealed shut again. Then he turned back to Jamal. You just blew up years of protocol, Kendrick. It was never about protocol. Langston narrowed his eyes. You accessed something that wasn't meant for you. You mean the truth? Langston moved closer. His voice dropped. That engine isn't yours to claim. You're a guest here. A temporary variable in a system that's worked for generations. Jamal tilted his head. And yet, I made it work in under 10 minutes. Langston's mouth curled into a tight, bitter smile. This isn't over. Jamal stepped toward the engine again. Its core still pulsing, calm, elegant, alive. No, he said quietly. It's just starting. But neither of them noticed what had happened behind the glass wall. Riley hadn't left the observation deck. She had stayed. And she had been recording everything. Professor Langston didn't clap. He walked over, snatched the wrench from Jamal's hand, and whispered words that would change everything. Langston didn't leave the lab that day, not immediately. He stayed long after the other students were gone, after the engine had powered down, after the silence became unbearable. Jamal stood near the window, not moving. The hum of the machine still vibrated through the steel flooring like a heartbeat refusing to die. But the air between him and Langston was colder than metal. Langston broke the silence first. You think this proves something? Jamal turned slowly. It proves the engine works. Langston's voice dropped an octave, calm, low, dangerous. You accessed a classified phase without clearance, used unauthorized tools, violated safety protocols. That engine isn't even listed in your track, it was for senior access only. And yet, it responded to me. Langston stepped closer, his eyes hard. Because someone somehow bypassed the system and uploaded your biometric profile into the legacy track database. That's fraud, Kendrick. No one touched anything. I followed the evidence. Don't flatter yourself. You don't belong in that system. You never did. Jamal held his ground. I belong in any system that's built on truth. Langston snapped. Truth has a chain of custody. There it was. The real voice behind the facade. Not the mentor. Not the professor. The gatekeeper. And he wasn't just angry that Jamal had succeeded. He was afraid. Afraid that Jamal had cracked a code meant to exclude him. Afraid that a black freshman, a kid with grease under his nails and intuition that textbooks couldn't map, had just exposed something bigger than a broken engine. Langston's voice sharpened. You were never meant to succeed here. Jamal didn't blink. You mean I was never allowed? Langston paused, just for a breath. Then he stepped back and tapped the control panel. Red lights blinked to life. Access logs, biometric flags. An internal alert pinged across the campus mainframe immediate. Security flag issued under Langston's authority. You hacked this lab, Langston said flatly. You'll be suspended pending investigation. If it were up to me, you'd be expelled before sundown. You know I didn't hack anything, Jamal said. Langston didn't respond. A few moments later, the door burst open. 2 campus security officers stepped inside, hands on their utility belts, shoulders stiff. They didn't speak to Langston. They didn't even speak to Jamal. They just turned to him with practiced professionalism. Mr. Kendrick, the taller one said, we need you to come with us. Jamal looked at them, then at Langston. Behind the glass wall, Riley reappeared, watching everything, phone still in hand, her eyes wide. I didn't break anything, Jamal said. Langston crossed his arms. No, you just broke the illusion. The shorter officer gestured. We can do this quietly. Jamal's backpack was still by the desk. He picked it up slowly. No one moved to help. No one asked questions. Langston stood tall as Jamal walked toward the exit, flanked by 2 armed men in Navy uniforms. He looked satisfied not because justice had been served, but because control had been re-established. The engine still hummed in the background, as if mocking the room's silence. As Jamal reached the door, Riley slipped out from behind the glass and took a quiet step forward. Their eyes met. She didn't say a word. She just held up her phone screen, already dimmed to black, and gently tapped the side twice before sliding it into her jacket. Record. Save. Back up. Her way of saying, I saw what they did. Jamal nodded once. The door closed behind him. Langston exhaled, steadying himself. His fingers tapped the edge of the workbench, calculating his next move. But even as he ordered the system logs to be wiped and the backup servers to be scrubbed, a quiet unease crept into his posture. He had underestimated Jamal, not because of the engine, but because of how quickly Jamal had become visible. Too visible. And visibility, in a system built on shadows and silence, was the most dangerous thing of all. That night, Langston made one final call from his office to someone off campus. Not an academic. Someone from a board that rarely made public statements. When he hung up, he stared at the glowing monitor for a long time. Because even as Jamal was being escorted through the halls like a criminal, even as the university prepared their statement of technical misconduct, even as the logs were manipulated, the engine logs still showed one unalterable line of code. Legacy override, authenticated Kendrick. Jay Langston couldn't delete it. And somewhere on campus, Riley had a full video of what happened recorded from start to end, including Langston's whisper, "You were never meant to succeed here." When campus security stormed in to escort Jamal out, the engine still humming behind him, someone quietly hit record on their phone. It wasn't supposed to go public. Not that fast. Not with that much clarity. The night after Jamal was escorted off campus, Riley sat alone in her dorm, the lights off, headphones in, and her phone screen glowing against the darkness. Her thumb hovered over the upload button. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Then she tapped. The video hit the student forum first. 36 minutes long. No editing. No commentary. Just raw truth. The footage began with Langston introducing the impossible engine. The dare. The mockery. Then the moment Jamal stepped forward, calm, unshaken, focused. Viewers watched him expose the engineered failure, bypass the flaw, activate the core, and unlock the system no one else could. But it wasn't the mechanics that went viral. It was the moment Langston leaned in, face twisted, voice dripping with disdain, and whispered, "You were never meant to succeed here." No one in the country could misinterpret that. Within 12 hours, the video spread like gasoline lit in the wind. Twitter caught fire. Engineering forums across Reddit exploded. Hashtags trended. Number engineered to fail. Number Kendrick override. Number systemic stem. News outlets picked it up by morning. Not just because of the racial implications, but because of the footage of the engine itself, the diagnostic feed clearly displaying a hidden override, labeled legacy mode. A term no one outside of military contractors or government-level labs should have access to. By noon the next day, the video hit 1 million views. But the headlines weren't just about racism anymore. They were about secrecy. They were about how a freshman at Alderton, one of the nation's top-tier engineering programs, had somehow activated a defense-grade engine phase with no clearance, and that his biometric ID was already inside the system. How? Why? Who let him in? And what was the university hiding? Jamal didn't speak. Not at first. He stayed off social media, ignored interview requests, and shut off his phone. His face had already been plastered across cable news. Mechanical prodigy or institutional target? One headline asked. Was Alderton filtering students through secret tech? Another read. But beneath all the noise, the heart of the video hit like a hammer, a black student publicly humiliated for succeeding too much, too fast, in front of the wrong eyes. Langston, meanwhile, remained silent. The university released a cold, rehearsed statement that afternoon. We are aware of a video circulating that raises questions regarding a classroom incident. The administration is conducting a full internal inquiry. Professor Langston remains a valued member of our faculty. We encourage the public to avoid premature conclusions. But the damage was done. Screenshots of the override system flooded online. Former students began posting vague, cryptic comments under burner accounts, stories of projects that were pulled, of being told they were not a good fit for fieldwork, despite straight A's. Someone leaked archived photos from 2012. A group of students gathered around an early prototype of the same engine. Every single one of them white, every name tied to a family donor. Then came the emails. An anonymous tipster posted screenshots allegedly from a faculty mailing list. One where Langston had forwarded internal access clearance docs, months before Jamal even enrolled. Jamal's name was already red flagged under a category labeled Monitor, Risk of Premature Exposure. The story shifted again. Now it wasn't just about a professor gatekeeping talent. It was about an institution that knew what it was doing, and had done it before. That same evening, a live panel discussion aired on a national network. 3 former Alderton alumni sat across from each other. A black female engineer who dropped out in 2015, a Latino systems tech turned whistleblower, and a white coding analyst who had interned in Langston's lab. Their stories painted a disturbing pattern: selective project access, unexplained failures, temporary bans from lab equipment, that somehow became permanent. One guest leaned forward and said it plainly. Alderton didn't just design a faulty engine. They designed a filter to trap minds that didn't come from the approved mold. And Jamal Kendrick broke it open on camera. That night, the university called an emergency meeting. An internal inquiry was officially announced not to the public, but to board members, donors, and faculty heads. They were told it would be fast, discreet, and aimed at minimizing exposure. They called it a containment plan. The next morning, Jamal received a letter from the university. He was officially suspended, pending investigation into unauthorized system access and violation of laboratory protocols. The letter cited serious security concerns. No mention of the video. No mention of Langston's statement. No mention of the engine's flawless operation. But someone else did. Alumni groups began drafting open letters. Influencers with engineering backgrounds, especially black STEM advocates, posted reaction videos breaking down the engine diagnostics, calling out the layered bias in the system design, and dissecting Langston's statement word for word. X. Number engineered to fail hit 4 million uses on X. But while Jamal sat in silence, reeling from the whirlwind, something else happened. The university quietly reached out to a key witness, a grad student named Devin Shales. He had interned under Langston the year prior. Devin had once built a modified subroutine for the same engine. Jamal cracked a patch that almost triggered the same override Jamal had activated. But Devin had been shut down and reassigned without explanation. He had receipts. Riley found out about him through a chain of private messages. She reached out to him the day the video went viral. Devin responded hesitantly. He said he'd talk off record. They planned to meet. He never showed. The next day, Devin's campus access was revoked. His research assistantship abruptly ended. The reason listed? Voluntary academic withdrawal. But Riley knew the truth. Because she checked the server logs. Devin had uploaded a 12 gigabytes folder to his private drive the night before he vanished, one containing lab notes, server-side logs, and emails from Langston himself. The folder was wiped within 24 hours. Except, she had already made a copy, but she didn't open it yet. Because she needed to be sure. Because this wasn't about one student anymore. This was about a system. As media buzzed and alumni demanded answers, the university launched an internal inquiry, but buried a key witness before they could speak. Riley hadn't slept in 2 days. Not because she couldn't, but because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Langston's face the moment Jamal activated the engine. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was fear. That stuck with her. That and the sealed folder Devin never got to deliver. She'd copied it the night he uploaded it, she told no one. Not even Jamal. But as media descended, alumni demanded statements, and lawyers began whispering behind closed doors. Riley knew silence was no longer protection, it was complicity. And she was done being complicit. She found Jamal in the most predictable place. The old maintenance hall beneath Eastwood Engineering. No cameras, no deans, just the ghost of a janitor's bench, cracked tiles, and the smell of rusted copper and spilled oil. He was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, headphones in, staring at a stripped-down turbine he'd found in the junk pile, not fixing it, just watching it. The way most people might watch a storm gather in the sky. He didn't look up when she stepped in. "You tracked me," he said, voice flat. "I guessed," she replied. "You're still loyal to broken machines." Jamal pulled out one earbud. "I'm loyal to things that don't lie." She sat beside him, not close, but within his gravity. There was a long pause. Then she pulled the folder from her backpack. It was thick, off-white, the kind of manila that fades around the edges when kept in dark places too long, stamped in bold red letters across the front. Project Omega, Legacy Track. Only Jamal didn't reach for it. Riley slid it gently onto the ground between them. "Devin gave it to me the night before he disappeared." Jamal looked at her now, slow and cautious. "He never withdrew," she said. "They cut his funding, erased his access, scrubbed his profile." "I figured," Jamal said. Riley looked down at her hands. "There's a subfolder in here, marked Level 2 access. It's encrypted. I cracked it last night." Still, Jamal didn't move. "You're in it," she said. "So are others. But it's not just about who gets access." She opened the folder and pulled out a series of printed documents, all stamped with university letterhead, some with Langston's initials. "These are not research notes. They're filters." Jamal frowned. "Filters?" "Behavioral profiles. compiled from entrance interviews, academic writing samples, digital footprints, all processed through a private logic prediction algorithm. It scores students on how closely they conform to what they call legacy intuition bias. It literally measures your thinking patterns against a model built from alumni graduates. Jamal stared at her. They've been flagging incoming students for over a decade, not just based on race but on how far their logic deviates from the school's institutional DNA. She handed him one of the pages. Jamal scanned it. There was a chart, a line graph, his name on the bottom, deviation index, 74.2% high risk of unfiltered innovation. Another line below it, recommended status, deny access to sensitive prototype systems, high probability of uncontainable exposure. Jamal said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "Who else?" Riley hesitated. Over 60 flagged students in the last 15 years. 23 were black, 14 Latino, 11 Asian American. The rest were either first-gen or transfer students from non-feeder schools. She handed him another page, one with a column titled Status, Dropped Out, Transferred, Expelled, Quietly Reassigned. None were allowed near Project Omega again. Jamal flipped through the sheets, his eyes catching phrases like internal containment and non-disruptive offboarding. Then he stopped on one name. Malik Warner. Jamal whispered it under his breath. "I know that name." 1,998, Riley said. Same lab, same professor, same engine design lineage. Warner was the only student back then who came close to accessing the override. The logs say his panel sequence triggered an unauthorized recognition cascade. What happened to him? Officially, transferred to another school. Unofficially, he vanished. Jamal stared down at the folder. "I thought this was just about the engine," he said. "Just Langston's ego. It's bigger," Riley said. "It's a machine inside a machine. And you kicked open the wrong door." He looked at her. "Why are you doing this?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I was in the room. I watched him humiliate you. I heard him say it. You were never meant to succeed here. And I didn't say a word." She exhaled, shaky. "But I can now." Jamal finally picked up the folder, thumbed through it again. Each page felt heavier than the last, like lead on his skin. "What do we do with this?" he asked. Riley didn't blink. "We burn it down." Jamal looked at her, then back at the turbine beside him, rusted, quiet, but still holding its shape. His voice was low. "Then we start with the names." But what neither of them knew was that someone else had accessed the system, someone watching, monitoring, waiting. And Jamal's file had just been moved to a folder even deeper than Project Omega. She handed Jamal a sealed folder, labeled Project Omega, Legacy Track Only, and the truth inside could destroy the school's future. The folder sat on the desk like it weighed 100 pounds. Jamal didn't move for a long time after Riley left. His hands, steady in every lab, trembled now, not from fear, but recognition. The kind that hits you when a nightmare you suspected was real suddenly hands you paperwork. Project Omega wasn't about innovation. It was about gatekeeping. It had never been a learning platform, it was a filtering tool. A system designed to detect and quietly eliminate students whose logic, language, or lineage threatened the aesthetic of institutional brilliance. The school's reputation for groundbreaking work had been artificially preserved, its pipelines protected. Not by excellence, but by exclusion. Legacy intuition bias, deviation index, internal containment. These weren't research terms, they were eugenics in a digital dialect. And Jamal was done reading. He needed someone to hear this. Someone in authority. Someone who couldn't pretend this wasn't happening. The next morning, Jamal walked into Dr. Thomas A. Belgrave's office, chair of the mechanical engineering department. Mid-60s, bald crown, heavy hands, soft voice, glasses, always resting low on the bridge of his nose like the world was always disappointing but not surprising. Belgrave was the gate. The kind that didn't slam in your face, it just didn't open unless your name matched someone in the building's plaques. Jamal stood in front of his desk, folder in hand. "I need to show you something," he said. Belgrave didn't look up immediately. "If this is about the disciplinary suspension, the process is already in motion." "It's not about that," Jamal cut in. "It's about Langston, and the engine, and what it's really being used for." Belgrave raised his eyes slowly. Jamal set the folder down. "I have documentation, student records, access logs, a full trail." Belgrave adjusted his glasses and opened the first page. He read in silence. For over 5 minutes. Each page he turned seemed to sink him deeper into the leather of his chair. At page 17, he exhaled not sharply, but long and tired. When he finally looked up, there was something unreadable in his expression. You understand the weight of this? He asked. I do. And you're certain these documents are authentic? Cross-verified, recovered from a whistleblower, tied directly to Langston's lab. Belgrave tapped the folder. And yet, I don't see Langston's name on most of this. He signed the Phase 2 biometric update. That alone links him to... I said most. Belgrave replied, tone colder now. If this goes public without proper internal vetting, the damage won't just be to Langston. It'll discredit the entire department, the faculty, the alumni trust. Jamal narrowed his eyes. You're worried about donors? I'm worried about integrity, Belgrave snapped. Jamal leaned forward. Then prove it. Investigate it. Publicly. With student oversight. Belgrave didn't answer. He closed the folder and set his hand over it. I'll review it. Discreetly. But if this is a misunderstanding, it's not. A beat of silence. Then Belgrave said, You've done more than accuse a tenured professor. You've challenged the foundation of this program. I challenged a machine that was built to silence people like me. Belgrave stood slowly. His hand still rested on the folder, but his eyes moved to the window behind Jamal. I've been here 31 years, he said. Watched this department rise. Watched it build partnerships with the Department of Defense, with Lockheed, with DARPA. You think we did that by letting every promising student rewrite the rules? Jamal's breath caught. He didn't just hear the words, he recognized them. They weren't new. They were scripted. Just like Langston's tone. Just like the admissions matrix. Just like every system Riley had exposed. Belgrave turned, finally meeting his eyes. You weren't supposed to have access to that engine. Jamal's voice dropped. What did you just say? Belgrave said nothing. He walked to the back of the office, opened a drawer, and pulled out a plain manila envelope. He tossed it on the desk beside Jamal. Inside were photocopies, early drafts of the Project Omega framework. And at the top, bold and unredacted, architects, T. Belgrave, R. Langston, C. Voorhees. Jamal stared down at the page. His heart felt like it stopped. Belgrave sat back down. We designed Omega after the 1998 failure. A promising student accessed restricted layers of the engine. His logic matched no known profiles. It triggered a cascade we weren't ready for. The military sponsors pulled back. We were nearly defunded. Malik Warner, Jamal said, voice hollow. Belgrave nodded. He wasn't a failure, Jamal said. You buried him. He was disruptive, unfiltered, couldn't be trusted to align with the institutional path. Jamal's voice cracked. He was brilliant. And uncontrolled brilliance is dangerous, Belgrave replied, especially when it comes from unfamiliar backgrounds. There it was. No metaphor. No coded language. Just institutional racism dressed in policy. Jamal clenched his fists. So, you built a system that lets the legacy kids look like geniuses and flags the rest of us as threats. We maintained order, Belgrave said. The world isn't fair, Mr. Kendrick. Universities reflect that. But they also protect their own. Jamal stood, eyes burning. You won't bury me like Malik. Belgrave gave a slight nod. No, you're already too visible. He slid the folder back toward Jamal. But don't mistake that for safety. Jamal picked it up. Without another word, he turned and walked out. But just before the door closed, Belgrave said quietly, You'd be wise to let this go. Jamal paused, then closed the door behind him. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because in his bag was the proof. And in his blood was the fire Malik Warner never got to finish burning. Jamal took the folder to the department chair, but what he didn't know was that the chair was one of the original architects of the plan. The threats started small. An unsigned email with no subject line. Just a single sentence. You've made your point. Now walk away. Then came the email flagging suspicious behavior on Jamal's university account. Access locked. IT claimed it was a routine review. The next day, his campus ID stopped working. He couldn't get into the engineering building, couldn't even swipe into the dining hall. By the end of the week, his scholarship was placed under review. Jamal had seen enough systems to know when one turned from cold to hostile. What scared him wasn't that it was happening, it was how routine it felt. He told Riley. She didn't ask if he was okay. She already knew the answer. The two of them began a slow, deliberate operation. Quiet, methodical. Riley handled digital tracing, cross-referencing the names in the Project Omega folder, with enrollment records and internship placement logs. Jamal, meanwhile, reached out using burner emails, encrypted apps, and even LinkedIn under a fake name. His goal was simple: find the students who'd vanished, the ones marked unfit. Some didn't respond. Others had disconnected entirely. Phone numbers out of service, social profiles scrubbed. A few replied with one-liners. "I've moved on. This isn't safe. Don't contact me again." But some cracked. One former student, a soft-spoken black woman named Nadira Trent, had been in Alderton's aerospace track back in 2014. She was a star, two-time national robotics finalist, featured in a local newspaper for designing a solar-powered drone in high school. And yet, no graduation record. Jamal asked why. Nadira answered with a single line. "Langston told me I'd been overplaced. Said my performance had plateaued, and I needed to transfer to another division. I never got near the labs again." Another name, Luis Andrade, top of his class in thermofluids, disappeared before the capstone year. Jamal found him working in a body shop in Arizona, rebuilding old trucks with a genius-level understanding of combustion systems. "They told me I was being evaluated for internship compatibility," Luis said over the phone. "I kept asking for specifics. Next thing I knew, I was told I'd violated an academic ethics policy I'd never even heard of." Jamal took notes. Riley cross-referenced each testimonial. The pattern was inescapable. Every one of these students had shown early signs of innovative thinking that diverged from institutional standards. Every one of them had touched or approached high-impact projects, and every one of them had been sidelined before reaching public-facing recognition. Buried brilliance, programmed suppression, excellence, erased on arrival. And then came the last name. One Jamal had circled 3 times in the folder. Malik Warner. The year Project Omega's prototype entered Phase 1. The year a student had triggered an override without permission. The year all documentation surrounding that override was sealed. Malik Warner was once a rising star in mechanical logic systems, a scholarship student from Houston. Raised by a single father who worked double shifts as a bus mechanic, Malik had submitted a project sophomore year that predicted modular engine self-correction using AI feedback loops years ahead of its time. He should have been a star. Instead, he disappeared. The record showed that he withdrew voluntarily, but there were no transcripts, no transfer logs, no graduation from another university. Jamal dug deeper. Nothing. Not on social media. Not in alumni networks. Not in engineering directories. Not even in public records. It was like he'd been scrubbed. Riley searched deeper, using an old alumni address system to locate his last known student mailbox. She cross-checked it with old local databases. Then she found something strange. Malik's final year dorm had been reassigned mid-semester. The reason? Unforeseen health withdrawal. There were no medical records attached. Jamal didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he and Riley visited the archives, building an old brick structure tucked behind the student union. Most students didn't even know it existed. Inside, they requested the 1998 engineering yearbook. It took over an hour. When the book was brought to them, Riley flipped to the index. Malik Warner wasn't listed, but on a photo page titled Junior Innovation Symposium Lab Group 3, there he was. Back row. No caption. No smile. Just watching the camera. The others in the photo? Langston, Belgrave, and another man, Charles Voorhees, then a young adjunct, now a senior advisor for the Department of Energy. Jamal stared at the image like it had punched him in the chest. Because Malik wasn't just erased, he had been disappeared by people who now controlled national innovation pipelines. Jamal said quietly. "They tested the engine on him first." Riley nodded. "He triggered it. They realized what that kind of mind could do. So they built the cage tighter." The silence between them was heavy. Then Riley said what Jamal had been dreading. "What if Malik's not missing?" Jamal looked at her. "What if they silenced him for good?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. No caller ID. He answered anyway. A voice, raspy, older, deliberate, spoke. "You don't know what you're walking into, Kendrick. Who is this? You need to stop chasing ghosts." Malik Warner didn't disappear. The voice interrupted. "He was disappeared, and you're on the same path." Then the line went dead. Jamal stared at the screen. Riley whispered, "Was that?" "I don't know," he said, but his voice was hollow. Then his email pinged. One new message. No subject, no sender, just an attachment, a video file, titled MW, Cam, a 2. Malik Warner. His face, speaking into an old camcorder, frozen on the first frame. Jamal's hand hovered over the play button, because if this was real, everything they knew was about to change. One name on the dropout list, a once brilliant student named Malik Warner, had vanished. The video file sat untouched on Jamal's screen for hours. He didn't press play right away. He couldn't. There was a heaviness in the room that made it hard to move, like the air itself knew something was about to be unearthed. Something buried. Something that had teeth. Riley sat across from him, quiet, cross-legged on the floor of her dorm room, surrounded by old engineering journals, backup drives, and the slowly unraveling chaos they'd both walked into. Jamal stared at the file. MW, Cam, A2. The number meant there was more than one. Finally, he clicked play. The footage was grainy, time-stamped. The 13th of March, 1998. Malik Warner looked young, 21, maybe 22. But his eyes were older, not tired, not broken, wary. I don't know who's going to see this, Malik began, adjusting the angle of the camera. But if something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. His dorm room looked eerily similar to Jamal's. Concrete walls, battered bookshelves, scattered tools, handwritten diagrams taped to the wall. I triggered something today in Langston's lab, Malik said. They brought in a new engine prototype, said it was meant to test low-temperature combustion. But the moment I started bypassing the filters, the diagnostics went crazy. Not glitchy, reactive, like the system was trying to shut itself down. He paused, ran a hand over his face. They weren't surprised. That's what scared me. Jamal leaned forward. Malik continued. Langston, Belgrave, and that new guy Voorhees, they didn't try to fix anything. They looked at each other like they'd seen this happen before. Then Langston pulled me aside and said I had talent, but the wrong kind. He said, "People like you solve problems no one asked you to solve." Riley let out a low breath. They've been using that language for decades. On screen, Malik stood and began pacing. They flagged me after that. My access card stopped working. I got pulled from my group project. The chair told me I'd be reassigned. I tried to report it, but the ombudsman said there was no record of the incident. He sat back down, looking directly into the camera. I know what this is now. Project Omega isn't an engine. It's a trap. It's built to flush out thinkers like me, the ones who don't come from legacy systems. They don't want breakthroughs. They want predictability. Jamal felt a chill crawl down his spine. On screen, Malik's face darkened. If you're watching this, and you found it, you need to understand they don't just erase you here. They replace you. My prototype has already been reassigned. They gave it to a white student in my year. He's now presenting it next month at a national conference. The same engine. Same logic. He held up a folder, not unlike the one Jamal had found. I kept copies, blueprints, memos. I've mailed them to my sister in case this disappears. Then he looked straight into the lens. My name is Malik Warner, and if I go missing, it wasn't an accident. The screen went black. The silence that followed felt like gravity had doubled. Riley whispered. He knew. Jamal's voice was barely audible. He saw the whole system before it even had a name. The video auto-looped. Jamal closed the file. Then stood. We have to find his sister. They found her in Chicago. Tanisha Warner, a public school teacher in Bronzeville. She hadn't spoken publicly about her brother in over 2 decades. Never did interviews. Never posted online about Alderton. When Jamal and Riley reached out, she agreed to meet, but only in person. She greeted them in her living room, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed, and tired in the way only people who've carried ghosts for too long become. Jamal explained why they came. Tanisha didn't look surprised. She walked to a small hallway closet, opened a box tucked behind photo albums, and returned with something, wrapped in an old hoodie. She unwrapped it, a dusty, boxy Sony camcorder from the late 90s. I didn't watch the tapes at first, she said, placing it gently on the coffee table. He told me not to. Said I'd know when it was time. Jamal took it carefully, like it was made of glass. There are 3 tapes in the box, she added, but only one is labeled. That's the one you already saw. What's on the others? Riley asked. I don't know. I never had the heart. Jamal asked. What happened to him? Tanisha looked away. They said he transferred. But I never heard from him again. No letters, no phone calls, no body, no obituary. She turned to face them fully now. My father said it was because Malik poked too deep into something that didn't want to be found. Jamal felt his chest tighten. You think they? Tanisha held up a hand. I don't know. But if they erased him, you better be ready, because if they buried Malik for finding this system, what do you think they'll do to the one who exposes it? Riley swallowed hard. I think we already passed that point. Back at the dorm, Jamal digitized the other two tapes. The first was lab footage, old handheld camcorder scenes of students testing the early engine prototype. Langston looked younger. Belgrave stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching more than instructing, and in the background a white student repeating lines from a script. That student? The same one who later received credit for Malik's work. The second tape was shorter. A recording of a faculty meeting. Unclear how Malik got it. Maybe a hidden mic. Maybe someone on the inside. The audio was shaky, but one line was crystal clear. Langston's voice. If we keep letting them through, we lose the control model. Talent isn't the problem, it's the pattern. We can't afford another Malik Warner. The tape ended. Jamal stared at the screen, then turned to Riley. They built an entire department on that fear. She nodded slowly. And now we have the blueprints. But Jamal didn't feel triumphant. He felt something deeper. Like Malik's voice had traveled 27 years to reach him. And now, the message was no longer a warning. It was a charge. Jamal hit play on the old tape, and what he saw on screen proved the racism was deeper, older, and far more calculated than anyone imagined. By Monday morning, Jamal's inbox was flooded, not with support, but threats. Legal warnings. Cold, precise emails stamped with university headers. A formal notice of academic misconduct investigation arrived first, accusing him of unauthorized access to classified systems and distribution of confidential property. Then came the letter. A crisp envelope slid under his dorm room door, thick with institutional weight. The university seal glared up at him like a verdict. He opened it slowly. Cease and desist. You are hereby instructed to immediately discontinue the dissemination of any and all materials, recordings, or documents related to classified research under Project Omega and its affiliated components. It went on for 4 pages. But the final line was what mattered. Failure to comply will result in full academic suspension and permanent revocation of scholarship funding. Jamal stared at the letter, then laughed not out of humor, but disbelief. They weren't denying the documents were real. They were just threatening him for making them visible. He handed it to Riley that afternoon in the student union, where they met in the far back corner under the buzz of flickering lights. She read it twice, then set it down between them. They're accelerating, she said. They know we have everything. Riley nodded, eyes scanning the room. We're not going to make it to graduation. I don't care. She paused. You should. But Jamal didn't respond. His mind was already moving ahead. He had the tapes, the footage, the blueprint copies, the filtered student logs, Malik's testimony, even the early drafts with Belgrave's name printed clearly beside Langston's. The story was airtight. What they needed now wasn't a newsroom. It was reach. And protection. That's when Riley mentioned an idea, an anonymous, decentralized student server built by a group of undergrad coders in the comp sci department. Hidden behind a virtual maze of firewalls and identity scramblers, it had once hosted leaked syllabi and housing discrimination complaints. Now, it could host something much bigger. By evening, they had the contact. A masked profile username. Resistance. 21 agreed to meet in the basement of the computer science annex. Jamal and Riley arrived at midnight, hoodies up, no phones. Inside, a dimly lit room smelled of burnt circuits and cold pizza. Wires hung like vines. 4 monitors glowed blue against rows of silent towers. Resistance. 21 turned out to be a junior named Dayon. Skinny. Brilliant. With sharp eyes and fingers that moved like language across a keyboard. People think encryption is the key, he said without looking up. But that's just the first wall. The real trick is noise. You don't hide your signal, you bury it in 1,000 other signals. Jamal slid over the drive. Dion inserted it. Scanned the contents. Didn't ask questions. I'll build a custom node for the upload, he said. Data mirrors every 3.7 seconds to 7 remote locations. If one drops, the others trigger instant backup shares. It'll hit the darknet first, then surface web through burner portals. How fast? Riley asked. 6 hours to build the architecture, 1 minute to launch. Jamal watched the screen flicker. And once it's live? Dion looked up for the first time. They can't bury it, not without digging through the internet's graveyard, and by the time they get there, the ghosts will be everywhere. Jamal nodded. This was it. The final move. Back at his dorm, Jamal prepared the final piece, his own recorded message. Just his voice, overlaying footage from the tapes, the documents, the engine readouts. No drama, no anger, just clarity. This isn't about me, he said, speaking into the mic. It's about who the system was built to ignore, to erase, to use, then discard. Project Omega isn't a project. It's a policy. And every policy has an architect. He paused. If you're watching this, they've already come for me. But they can't stop all of us. He saved the file, named it Engineered to Fail, Final. Then he plugged in the drive to sync with Dion's node. The transfer began. 9%, 17%, 28%. Jamal leaned back, heart pounding. He knew the moment was coming. The real attack. Riley texted from across campus. Building node, ETA 4 hours, don't move until I get there. But she was too late. At 39%, the screen flickered. Once, then again. Then it went black. Jamal froze. He tapped the keyboard. Nothing. Mouse dead. He reached for the power button. Still nothing. The screen blinked back on, just for a second. System failure. Primary drive compromised. Then, another message scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Access terminated. The file had stopped uploading at 41%. Jamal stared at the screen. Then, slowly, a new window opened on its own. No commands, no input. Just one sentence appeared. White text on a black screen. You were warned. His blood ran cold. The laptop shut down completely. Not just sleep mode. Dead. Jamal backed away. Heart racing. He pulled out the drive. It was warm. Too warm. He plugged it into his backup unit. No detection. The entire drive had been bricked. Wiped from the inside. Encrypted self-destruct probably planted weeks ago through the university network. They were inside his system. His backups. His air-gapped machine. The war had escalated. Not metaphorically. Literally. Jamal's phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown. Number. Just a link. He opened it. It led to a private stream. His own face filled the screen. Footage from inside his dorm. A hidden camera. Running for weeks. Every plan. Every document. Every conversation with Riley. Every email. They had everything. And now, they were letting him know. They weren't just watching. They were building a case. Framing him as the hacker. The liar. The threat. Because if they couldn't silence him, they'd destroy his credibility. And just as Jamal grabbed his coat, prepared to run to warn Riley, his phone buzzed again. A second link. He clicked it. This one led to a student message board. Already trending. Kendrick faked everything new leak exposes plot to frame professors. A fake document. Manufactured logs. Blurry screenshots, claiming Jamal had altered the engine diagnostics himself. Jamal's photo at the top, his name in bold. The comments section filled with fire. Typical race-baiting nonsense. This dude just wanted attention. Can't innovate. So he sabotates. Another affirmative action flop. Riley's name appeared next. She'd been tagged. They were coming for her too. Jamal's world tilted. They hadn't just erased his proof. They'd replaced it. And the internet was already choosing sides. With the help of a student-run server, Jamal prepared to drop the final evidence online. But his laptop suddenly went dead. Jamal didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. He sat in the corner of the makeshift studio Dayon had set up in the old theater department's sound booth, the one no one used since they'd shifted performances to the new auditorium. Dust lined the edges of the boards. The lights flickered like old memories. The backup drive lay on the table. It was the last untouched copy. Riley had insisted they keep one physical copy off-grid, encrypted, hidden behind 5 layers of analog protection, a drive disconnected from any network, stored in the linings of her violin case. You don't just protect truth, she'd said. You hide it. Like a weapon. Now, that weapon sat between them. Waiting. Jamal stared at it like it was breathing. Because this was no longer about defending himself. It was about exposing everyone else. Riley handed him the adapter silently. Dion worked the board, setting up a live relay that would mirror the file to multiple cloud locations, dark web archives, and a timed Twitter thread that would auto-drop screenshots every 15 minutes once the launch began. Jamal took a deep breath and plugged it in. The screen lit up. Folders unfolded, like layers of rot peeled back from fruit. Omega, core, divided by deviation. Alg divided by Malik. Warner, Cam divided by legacy. Override. Docs divided by blacklisted. Students divided by Langston plus Belgrave. Correspondence. Every lie, every denial, every redacted truth right there. Jamal didn't flinch. He clicked, execute broadcast. The screen paused for a second. Then the files began duplicating across servers, like water flooding through cracks in a dam. Riley's eyes didn't leave the screen. It's working. Dion nodded, his hands flying over the keys. Threads scheduled, firewalls in place. Mirror nodes lighting up across 6 continents. Jamal's voice was quiet. What if it's not enough? Riley looked at him. Then we do what Malik didn't get to finish. He sat back, exhaled, and finally felt the weight shift off his chest. For the first time since this all began, the truth wasn't a secret. It was data. Undeniable, permanent, and global. Within 2 hours, Twitter caught fire. Number engineered to fail began trending in New York. Then LA. Then Berlin. Then it went global. Screenshots of the documents were posted, shared, analyzed, stitched into TikToks, debated in live streams. Activist networks amplified it. STEM professors started threads breaking down the logic of the algorithms used in Project Omega. Software engineers confirmed the code's bias. An open letter, signed by over 300 black engineers and scientists, hit Medium within hours. A Google Doc called the Kendrick Files, a live breakdown of every name mentioned, every department complicit, every student flagged and erased, began circulating in college groups nationwide. And in the eye of it all, Jamal stayed silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because the evidence was finally speaking louder than he ever could. He and Riley sat in the studio, watching retweet counters climb into the hundreds of thousands. Riley's hands trembled as she scrolled through her own name, now trending in solidarity, listed as one of the insiders who didn't stay silent. Even students who had doubted Jamal began to shift. Some quietly apologized in comment threads. Others deleted old posts. A few anonymously began sending in their own stories, adding to the list of buried brilliance. Then the first news crew arrived outside Alderton's gates. Then another, and another. By the end of the day, CNN was on campus. The next morning, Jamal woke to a knock on the studio door. Not frantic, not threatening, just calm, deliberate. He opened it slowly. A woman stood there. Late 40s, crisp gray suit, black heels, a federal badge visible just long enough to verify, then tucked away. Jamal Kendrick? She asked. Yes. I'm Maya Ralston, Office of Civil Rights, Department of Education. I've been assigned to investigate the allegations and documentation released under Project Omega. Jamal stepped aside. She entered without asking. Riley joined them moments later, her eyes cautious but focused. Maya didn't waste time. I've reviewed the archive. Multiple federal agencies have already been looped in. What you've exposed implicates not just Alderton, but several grant-funded partnerships, private sector internships, and federal defense contractors. Jamal swallowed. They've been running this for decades. I know, she said quietly. That's why I'm here. She opened her bag, pulling out a leather-bound folder and a slim digital tablet. I need you to walk me through it, from the engine activation to the files, to Malik Warner. She paused. I also need you to testify. Jamal's breath caught. Riley stepped forward. They'll bury him if he does. Maya didn't blink. Not this time. There are too many eyes now. We're already building a case for a congressional hearing. The department chair has retained legal counsel. Langston has gone silent. She looked Jamal in the eye. But you are the reason this is happening. And you're the only one who can finish what started 27 years ago. Jamal said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll testify. Maya gave a small, grim smile. Good. Because they've already lawyered up. And they're going to say you faked everything. That this is about revenge. Affirmative action. Ambition. Jamal met her gaze. They've said worse. Behind closed doors, she placed a small recorder on the table. Then let's bring it into the light. She hit record. State your name. Jamal's voice was clear. Jamal Kendrick. Why are you here? He didn't blink. Because I was supposed to be erased. Outside the studio, protesters began gathering. Students, faculty, even alumni, chanting, holding signs, wearing shirts printed with blue schematics and bold letters, built brilliant. Blacklisted anyway. Legacy logic is not innovation. Number, we are Malik. And far above it, all trending at number 1 worldwide. Number engineered to fail within hours. Number engineered to fail trended worldwide. And a federal education investigator arrived on campus with one name to call first, Jamal Kendrick. They broadcast it live. Courtroom C, Alderton County Courthouse. Tall columns, polished wood. Screens set up in every corner. Reporters crowded the hallways. Students and alumni pressed against the glass walls. Thousands more watched from live streams across the nation. The defamation suits, civil claims, and federal investigations had forced the university's hand. The board of trustees had resigned. The law firm for the institution had been replaced. Langston, Belgrave, Voorhees all named defendants. The university itself was on trial. Jamal Kendrick wasn't just a plaintiff. He was the lens through which the world would see how much power had been abused and how much ground remained hidden. He sat in the witness stand. Under a bright light, his face looked sharp, defended, human. The judge, a stern woman with calm but unforgiving eyes, addressed the room. Mr. Kendrick, you are here to testify under oath. Everything you say is part of the public record. Do you understand? Jamal nodded. I do. The courtroom was silent. First came the plaintiffs, a coalition of former students labeled in the Project Omega folder. Many sat together, somber, some tearful, some so long removed they'd forgotten how to believe in justice, but all present to reaffirm. They had been erased. Next, the defense. The university's attorneys, methodic, procedural, trying to frame Jamal's documents as hacks, forgeries, or false correlations. They questioned chain of custody, demanded proof of origin, challenged integrity of file backups. Langston, from his seat, stared at Jamal, with that same cold pride he'd always worn. Belgrave maintained a stoic calm. Voorhees scribbled notes. The gallery watched them as though viewing magnates caught in a scandal. The first round of testimony focused on the engine, the biometric override, the blueprint archive, the taped meeting from 1998. Jamal recounted Malik Warner's words, the sealed folder from Riley, the hidden biometric panel, the alarm that locked the lab. The defense pressed, how do you prove the override was intentionally placed and not a system error? Jamal replied, steady, because the code matched a lineage of access logic only insiders could seed. This wasn't random, it was architected. They introduced expert witnesses. A former DOE systems analyst confirmed the algorithm's bias. A professor of ethics showed how legacy track systems created exclusion. Alumni engineers corroborated suppressed project assignments. The evidence stacked. At one point, the defense tried to discredit Riley. They showed an email chain allegedly manufactured, suggesting she had tinkered with the data. But then, Riley was called to the stand. In calm, unwavering tone, she defended her integrity, affirmed her chains, and swore she was the one who recorded Langston's whisper. You were never meant to succeed here. She said she'd handed the phone to Jamal moments before the lab door closed. The court murmured. Jamal sat back and watched the line of broken students stand to tell their stories. A woman who lost scholarships, a Latino engineer forced to shift to non-engineering, a black student who declined graduate school because the program had closed her access. Each one named names, dates, and opportunities lost. When it came time for rebuttal, the university's counsel pleaded mitigation. These systems were in place for consistency, for protecting legacy standards, for ensuring fairness in a competitive environment. They claimed the files were admission experiments, not exclusion protocols, that any errors in blacklists were unintentional and due to system updates. But the courtroom had grown restless. Social media had already flooded with protest clips, snippets of Langston's whisper, video of the engine humming, number We Are Malik slogans. The public wasn't just watching, they were demanding verdicts. Then came closing statements. Jamal's attorney spoke with clarity and fire. Project Omega wasn't about mentorship. It was about curation. Curating who gets to be heard, who gets to build, to be seen. Mr. Kendrick didn't break in. He broke out the system. And the only just verdict is for the system to be dismantled. Defense counsel argued, reasoned, damage control, systemic precedent, potential backlash. Belgrave's defense claimed years of partnership grants and the unintended consequences of innovation. The judge looked at the jury, her voice resolute. You have heard testimony, viewed evidence, weighed chain of custody, listened to human cost. The verdict you render is not just about compensation. It's about accountability. The jury retired. The room went silent. Reporters held their breath. Cameras recorded every motion. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the jury filed in. The foreperson stood. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Kendrick. We award full damages and declare institutional reform. Further, we recommend termination of Project Omega and immediate removal of biased algorithmic systems from university processes. Gasps. Weeping. Some stood. Riley's eyes glowed. Many in the gallery cheered. The defendants slumped, some in shock, some trying to mask fear. Then the judge spoke, preparing to issue the formal order. And that's when Langston stood. He rose from his seat. Silence snapped. All eyes on him. He cleared his throat. The defense counsel looked panicked. Langston's voice came low, unsteady but loud enough for every mic. I confess. A hush descended. He continued. I authorized the censor override. I ceded the biometric access logic. I colluded with Belgrave and Voorhees to filter students by algorithmic conformity because I believed the system had to protect itself. Because I believed that only certain minds could safeguard innovation. The courtroom froze. Langston's confession was not a defense. It was a surrender. He paused, then looked directly at Jamal. But I confess not for mitigation. I confess because I want the record to know that I was wrong. That the system I helped build betrayed intention. That the very program I taught poisoned the future of minds like yours. Belgrave's face strained. Voorhees looked away. Then he added something that made Jamal's blood run cold. And because I built this system believing that people like me would prevent it from ever being challenged. A twist nobody expected. He didn't blame ghosts. He claimed authorship. He didn't ask for mercy, he revealed reality. In that moment, the judge rapped her gavel. Let the record show this statement has been admitted. The verdict stands. The court orders the immediate appointment of oversight committees, reform plans, removal of biased algorithms, and reparation to every affected student. Tears welled in Riley's eyes. Jamal felt something shatter: guilt, triumph, sadness, relief, all colliding. Outside the courtroom, protesters cheered. Cameras recorded. Lives changed. And though the verdict had been rendered, Jamal knew the real journey was just beginning. Just as the judge prepared to rule, Professor Langston stood up and confessed, but not the way anyone expected. The news broke before Jamal could even board his train out of Alderton. A full ride offer from MIT. Not just admission recruitment. A direct line into their advanced propulsion lab. Personalized letter signed by the director herself. A space reserved not just for brilliance, but acknowledged brilliance. He didn't respond. Not right away. Because the noise was deafening. Not just the offers. Not just the sudden accolades. But the hypocrisy of it all. Publications that once ignored him now called him the next Elon. Recruiters who'd rejected his early applications sent apology emails at 3 a.m. Misjudged potential. Exciting future. Groundbreaking resilience. The university, after Langston's confession, scrambled to repair its image. Alderton issued a formal apology to Jamal, to the students blacklisted, and even posthumously to Malik. Warner. They hosted a press conference in the main quad, heads bowed, voices shaking with institutional remorse. And they offered Jamal something else. A legacy scholarship named after him. He was the first black student in Alderton's history to have an award named while still living. A fund dedicated to identifying innovative thinkers from historically marginalized backgrounds. A permanent engine bay in the lab renamed in his honor. But Jamal had one condition. He wouldn't accept a single dollar. Not until they did one thing: add Malik Warner's name to the wall. The university hesitated. There was no diploma, no confirmed graduation, no published thesis. But Jamal didn't blink. He earned it, he said. More than most of the names already up there. Riley backed him. So did a wave of alumni. Number Honor Malik trended for 48 hours. Under pressure, the university caved. 1 week later, in a quiet corner of the Engineering Hall of Honor, a new nameplate appeared. Malik D. Warner, 1998 Innovator. Excluded. Never forgotten. Jamal stood beneath it at sunrise. No cameras, no press. Just silence and the hum of something unseen, alive, continuing. He whispered, "You finished it, brother." The patent came next. His design, the recalibrated engine sequence, the logic path override was filed under his name. Not Langston's, not the lab's, his. Riley helped navigate the legal maze. And when the final paper was approved, Jamal held it in his hands. stunned. A system designed to erase him had accidentally made him permanent. And yet, he wasn't satisfied. He declined the speaking tour offers, turned down the keynote invites, politely refused corporate endorsements, because it wasn't about the fame. It never had been. What haunted him was the thought of how many Malik Warners were still out there, whose names wouldn't trend, whose footage wasn't captured, whose brilliance would be paved over and repackaged. Jamal told Riley one night, "It doesn't matter what I build if the system stays the same." "So what do we do?" she asked. He looked at her. "We rebuild the system." And that's how the Kendrick Initiative began. A student-led, open-source repository of suppressed research, misattributed projects, and flagged algorithms. Every case verified, every document cataloged, created not to expose but to restore. Within weeks, it became a movement. Other universities faced pressure. Lawsuits were reopened. Systems audits conducted. Some schools voluntarily retired their legacy track admissions entirely. A new standard emerged: equity by design, innovation by access. But Jamal wasn't done. There was still one thing left. The place where it all began. The lecture hall, the one where Langston had dared him, where Connor had smirked, where students whispered, where Jamal had stood alone in front of a machine that was never meant to be solved. He walked in. Same time of day, same seat in the back. But this time, he didn't wear a hoodie. He wore the department's guest lecturer badge, not for prestige, but because he'd been invited back by student vote. The class was full. Students murmured. Some recognized him immediately. Some didn't, but had clearly heard. When Jamal stepped to the front, the room quieted. He looked out across rows of eyes. Young, old, black, brown, white, all waiting. Not like before, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. And Jamal realized this was the first time the silence felt like respect. He didn't use slides, didn't open with credentials. He simply pointed to the prototype engine still displayed on the lab table. "That machine," he said, "taught me everything I needed to know about who gets believed and who gets blamed." He paused. "You've heard my story. But what matters now is how you change yours. Ask better questions. Build systems that outlive bias. Protect minds before they're in pain." A student in the front row raised a hand. "What would you say to the ones who still think you were just lucky?" Jamal smiled. "I'd say luck doesn't build legacy engines." Another hand. "What happened to Langston?" Jamal answered honestly. "He's no longer teaching. He's facing professional sanctions. But I don't want to end this story with his name." He gestured to the room. "I want to end it with yours. Because every system that tried to exclude me was designed long before I was born. But I stood here anyway. And now so can you." The room erupted in applause. Not because he'd won, but because they knew he'd rewritten the rules. As the lecture wrapped and students filed out, one lingered behind. A freshman, nervous, hands in his pockets, black, awkward, brilliant. He walked up slowly. "Mr. Kendrick?" he asked. Jamal turned. "Call me Jamal. I watched the whole trial. The documents. The thread. I thought about quitting before that. Why? They kept telling me my logic was scattered. That I wasn't thinking in straight lines." Jamal smiled. "Then you're exactly who they're afraid of." The student laughed. Softly. Jamal leaned in. "Don't let them narrow you down." The kid nodded and left. Jamal stayed a few minutes longer, alone now, until he looked up at the same wall where once only white inventors hung in frames. Now, his portrait sat beside Malik Warner's, and under it, etched in clean steel. He was never meant to succeed here. He succeeded anyway. How many futures get erased before anyone even asks why? If you saw the truth but knew no one would believe you, would you still speak up? This story isn't rare. It's just the one that got caught on camera. What would you have done if it happened to you, or your child? Comment below with your thoughts, and share this if you believe silence should never be stronger than justice.